What's up, everybody? Welcome to System Crafters. I'm David Wilson, and today we are going to learn how to give Emacs Psychic Completion Powers with prescient.el. Well, they may not actually be psychic, but it'll be based on math, and it will be useful to you, so I'll let you be the judge about whether they're psychic or not. So in Emacs, one thing that you probably have noticed if you've used it for very long is that completions are everywhere. So basically, whenever you try to open a file, or you switch a buffer, or try to launch a command interactively using meta X or alt X, many commands that you launch in Emacs will give you some kind of completion list. And this, in my opinion, is one of the most powerful parts of Emacs because it gives you pretty much everything inside of Emacs at your fingertips. You can very easily find the things that you need to find using a multitude of commands that are provided in box in Emacs. Though one thing that you also might notice if you've used these completions very often is that sometimes it gets a little bit tiresome to continue launching these commands and looking for the same things over and over again. Like, let's say you have a command that you like to launch directly without a key binding because it doesn't really need a key binding, but you do need it probably like once or twice a day. And to have to open up meta X and then search for that command by using whatever method you use, either as Helm or Ivy, etc. It'd be nicer if it was a little bit more convenient. So it would be good if if Emacs could help you with that by remembering the things that you use most frequently and then be able to give them to you first instead of just like giving you the full list of selections that you could pick from. So this is where prescient.el comes in. And basically, it's a sorting and filtering extension for Emacs, which works with Ivy, company mode, and Selectrum. So it basically provides the ability to sort candidates based on the frequency and recency of which you use them. So basically, if you use a particular command from meta X a lot, then it will show up higher on the list so that it's easy to pick again. Same thing with a lot of other commands that have completions like describe function, describe variable, find file, etc. All those things can now have sorted results that are based on your own usage patterns. And in my experience, at least with using the package called smex for meta X in the past, is very helpful to be able to have this sorted list of frequently used selections basically in any of these commands that you run. Another thing that Prescient gives you is a configurable list of filtering rules so that it's easier to narrow down that list of selections whenever you have that list in front of you. So instead of having to type out some full word that is a part of the selection that you're looking for, you can actually just type out the initials of the sections of the completion, and that will actually make it a lot faster. You can search for things just with like 4 letters rather than typing in 2 or 3 words. So that's something that's pretty useful. However, you might notice that packages like Ivy and Helm already have some functionality for this. So I think Prescient, the biggest thing that it brings to the table is the sorting capabilities, but also the customizable filtering is pretty useful. So you might try to use that instead of what you get from Ivy in this case. And also Selectrum is I don't know, maybe it's newer. It's a newer completion package that is reminiscent of Ivy in that it's very minimalistic, but I think it's more stripped down, so it doesn't have a lot of stuff that comes with it. So if you want to get that Ivy-style filtering, you definitely need to have something like Prescient to do that for you whenever you're using Selectrum. So we'll talk about Selectrum in another episode, but for today we're going to focus mostly on Ivy and company mode with the Prescient integrations. So let's just jump right into looking at how to use this with Ivy. So I like Ivy. I use Ivy all the time. And since it's one of the main integrations, we're going to try to use that first. So first of all, before we try to install Prescient, what we want to do is use meta X without Prescient so we can see what the history and everything looks like because it doesn't have any. So if we run meta X, this is the list of commands that I get just out of the box from Ivy whenever I run, I believe this is council meta X. This is the command that I'm actually using in this configuration. So we can type in something like if I want to get this EWW buffer select, if I typed EBS, it doesn't show up. EBS, that does show up. So this filtering idea, Ivy already does have this, but we can also get something like this with prescient. But let's say I wanted to run a command, let's say a eShell. So I'm going to run eShell, and it puts me into eShell, which is what we expect. However, if I use metax again, I get the same list of commands that I got before. So we're not getting any kind of help from Emacs to remember what commands we use frequently or recently. So this is where we're going to try to use prescient to solve this problem. So I'm going to run this little bit of Emacs Lisp. It's basically just using use package to install ivprescient. And an important thing to note is that if you're going to use this, you need to make sure that it gets loaded after council if you are also using council with Ivy, because council does a lot of customization to Ivy, and prescient needs to change some of that. So if you load council after prescient, it's going to break the prescient integration. So make sure that you use after council in your configuration so that prescient always gets loaded after council does. And then lastly, we're going to run the ivprescient mode 1 to turn on the ivprescient integration. So I'm going to use Control-X, Control-E to install and load this. And now if I use metax, immediately you're going to see something different, which is all of the list of commands from metax are sorted, and they seem to be sorted based on the length. So we're getting the 2-letter commands, 3-letter commands, etc. In the results here. And this seems a little bit disruptive at first because you're used to seeing a different set of results whenever you run metax or council Emacs. But I think it does matter later on whenever you're using some of the filtering options that come with prescient. So we'll see that in a bit. So now I'm going to run eShell one more time here, and it's going to pull me to eShell. But if I run metax again, we'll see that eShell is now the topmost item in this list. And any other command that I use, like find file, etc., now will be added to this list of suggestions at the very top for metax. And this is unique to the metax command. Every other command that you might use with prescient will have its own set of most recent commands or most recent selections, so you don't have to worry about them polluting each other. So similarly, we can look at a variable definition. So let's see, how about, or a function. Let's look up the function ivprescient mode. So I'm going to use Control-HF, and I believe this is giving me council describe function. So if I press enter here on ivprescient mode, you can see that we don't have any kind of history suggestions here. But if I use ivprescient mode, well, that actually turns, oh no, it doesn't turn off because I'm not running it. So if, so we got the documentation for that now. I'm going to use Control-HF one more time. In this case, it actually doesn't seem to be suggesting it like I expected it to. So maybe that's because it's not in the list of things to be. Oh, wait, hold on. Is it running? Yeah, it's running. Okay. Let's make sure that it's running. It's disabled, ivprescient. Okay. So now we'll do Control-HF again. Okay, so it doesn't seem to be working for describe function, which is interesting. It did work. Oh, maybe I use Control-HV instead. That's interesting. So I thought I did Control-HF here. Enter. Yeah. Now I do Control-HF again. It doesn't give it to me, but if I do Control-HV, it does give me ivprescient mode, but maybe that's because my cursor's on it. How about this? I'm going to do Control-HV on prescient history length. All right, I got the value of that. And now I'm going to do Control-HV again, and it does work on describe variables. So it's interesting that it did not work for describe function like I expected to, but maybe there's a reason for that. So basically what's happening here is anytime that you make a selection in one of these lists, prescient is keeping a list of all your recent selections, and it's also assigning a number to the selection. So every time you pull up one of these commands, it's going to give your selection, it's going to add 1 to the result, but then it's going to use some other variables to provide some kind of like decay for the recency of and frequency of these command usages, so that it can do the sorting itself internally. So basically, however many times you call a command and how recently you called the command both come into play whenever it is sorting these commands to give you these suggestions. And these are controlled by the following 3 variables. First of all is prescient history length, which basically says how many candidates will be remembered. And by default, this is going to be 100. So basically, it will remember up to 100 frequently used candidates. That might be a lot for you. So if you don't want it to remember 100, you can set that to something like 20 or 30 or something like that instead. So that's something to know in case you see that your whole list is taken up by recent things and you would prefer to be able to scan through for whatever reason. It might not be actually that useful to change this. So it's really a matter of your own personal taste. We also have prescient frequency decay, which is a multiplier applied to each frequent candidate, each selection. And this defaults to the value of 0.997. So basically, every time you select a selection, it's going to add 1 to the value that it stores for that, but then it's going to multiply it by 0.997. So if you know anything about multiplication with fractional numbers like this, it's basically going to gradually make the value of that go lower. But the more instances you have of that value that one being added, the less it's going to go down, I guess, basically. So the idea being that over time, this number is going to cause that frequency value to go down. Now, the thing is, it doesn't just go for the value that the candidate you selected. It also gets applied to every other candidate that is being stored in the history. So every time you select one item, anything else in that list is going to be decayed by this value. So basically, over time, those values get less and less the more that you select other things. So this is how eventually items eventually drop out of your history. They decay to the point where they hit this prescient frequency threshold, which is defaulting to 0.5. So if a value ever hits 0.5, which means that it's gotten so low that you haven't used it enough that it's now 0.5 or less, then it gets removed from the history entirely. So this basically just dictates how quickly some frequently used selection goes away. And I don't know, I think that the defaults for these are pretty good. So you probably don't need to change them at all until you notice that they're causing trouble for some reason. I really don't think that that's going to be the case. So you may not have to change these at all. Also worth noting that these variables apply to all usages of prescient, not just ivpressure. So any other integration for prescient will follow the same variable settings for what you set them to. So we've already tried council describe variable, which did work. Apparently I didn't try council describe function before I did this, so that explains why we saw a problem there. It does work with councilfind file in my experience. So if I were to, let's see, let me go to another folder, projects, code, Emacs from scratch. So if I were to open a file from this folder, like let's say hello.org, and then I use Control X F again for councilfind file, we're going to see that hello.org is now pushed up to close to the top. The previous and the current and previous directory items are also here ahead of that. I'm not sure why it's sorted that way. However, hello.org is toward the top. Now, you may be thinking, well, I don't like that very much. I don't want it to be sorted this way. I want it to be sorted in the way that Ivy normally does it. Yeah, that's probably the way that I think about it too, but it is possible to change that, and we'll see that in just a second. Also, if you notice that we run council switch buffer, which I have bound to Control Alt J, if we select hello.org and then run council switch buffer again, it does not automatically put hello.org where the cursor is, and that's because you really don't want your buffer selection to be modified by this sorting, mainly because you want to retain the default behavior of switch buffer, which is to select the most recent buffer before the current buffer. That way you can switch between them quickly. So basically, if you want to go back and forth between the previous buffer in the same window, you can just continue to hit switch buffer, and it will automatically select the previous buffer, basically. Now, the way this gets controlled is with the variable ivprescientsort commands. And prescientsort commands, and this is a list of symbols which dictate what functions ivprescient will not try to do history and sort and filtering for, or sorting for only. So the way this works is that you can either make it an allow list, where the list only contains the name of functions where the sorting would be turned on, or you can make it a list where you have this not symbol, not keyword symbol, and then the name of commands that you want it to not be enabled for. So basically you can just have this be a deny list of functions, which it is by default. So basically by default it's saying don't apply this behavior to swiper, swiper iSearch, or Ivy switch buffer. So we can see now that council switch buffer, it doesn't work on purpose because ultimately council switch buffer calls Ivy switch buffer. So this explains why we don't see that behavior in council switch buffer. So if you find that there are other Ivy commands that you do not want Ivy prescient to affect with its sorting, you can add them to this list. So also we mentioned before that in MetaX, when you run that, it starts to sort things based on the length of the selection. If you don't like that behavior and you find it to be disruptive for you, you can actually turn that off with the prescientsort length enable nil setting. By default, it's set to true, but if you set it to nil, like let's run MetaX now. You can see we still sort by length, but if I were to use Control-X, Control-E to run this to set the value to nil, and I run MetaX again, now they are not sorted by length. They're sorted more by the order of the items as they were being given to council to start with. So if you don't like that sorting, you can definitely change it. Let's go ahead and set that back to true, though, for the future examples. All right, so now we are going to look into how we can change the filtering method. But first we need to kind of experiment with the filtering methods to understand what they do. And Prescient comes with a few different filtering methods that are all useful in their own ways. And basically it relates to how you type in text to search for selections that would be in your completion list. I'm checking my camera every once in a while to make sure it's not frozen like last time. So we have a few options here, and the defaults are literal, regular expression, and initialism. So literal means that the words that you type must be a substring of the candidate. So we can type EVI for evil, and then if you press space, you can type LIN to get evil in line, something line. And that's basically the literal search approach. So basically, if you type EVILINE, you see that it doesn't show up. So you basically have to put spaces in between so that it can notice that these are substrings. Each piece is a substring of the way that the candidate is getting separated. So the candidates are usually being separated by spaces or some kind of symbol that would denote some difference between words. So in this case, hyphens between the segments of the command names are being used to split them. And then now we're using a space when we type in our substring words for the literal filtering approach. So initialism is the next one that's kind of useful, where it says the subquery must match a substring of the initials of the candidate. So in this case, we can type in, like if you wanted to find find file at point, we could type FFAP. And now it's giving us FFAP at first because it's getting that substring. However, it will also find the find file at point full command because each letter corresponds to the first letter of one of those substrings inside of the actual selection. So if you like to use sort of the initials of the command to be able to find a command, you can easily just type that in. So what about find file other window? Yeah, so FFOW will bring you to find file other window and all the other iterations of that as well. And that's the initialism search. And then the other default is regular expression, which is pretty obvious if you are familiar with regular expressions. So if I were to type in a caret evil, it would give me all the commands starting with evil. And then I can also do something like dot star line to get everything that starts with evil and then has line somewhere after that, or even line with a dollar sign, or I could even just do anything with line dollar sign to get line at the end of every command. So basically, you just use normal regular expression command syntax to search for results. I believe that this is also default behavior in Ivy. Whenever you're searching with Ivy, you can use regular expressions there too. So those are the sort of default settings. Those three things work every time that you use any kind of completion that has prescient hooked up. However, there are a few other options. Prefix, which is the substrings match the beginning of words found in the candidate in order, separated by the same non-word characters. So what I'm going to do is switch out initialism with prefix here, and I'm going to run this real quick just to see what it does. And now I'm going to run, so I believe it would be F-F-A-P, which then gives me find file at point. And the reason why I have to use the dashes is because prefix tells me that I have to. Basically, it says that I have to use the beginning of words found in the candidate in order separated by the same non-word characters that separate the words in the query. So it is necessary to use the same character. If I do FFAP, it works somewhat, but I think that's probably because of the literal or possibly regexp. So anchored is a similar approach, but it makes it so that you do not have to use the same separators as you did before with prefix. So if I were to load this up, I could use FFAP as before. However, I can also use capital letters, and these capital letters are basically saying this capital letter find the same letter, whether it's capital or not, at the beginning of each segment. So FFAP in capital will also give me find file at point. So the idea here is that it's faster and potentially faster to type the capital letters for the prefixes that you're looking for instead of typing in the hyphens as well. You can also do things like FIFAP or FIFPO, stuff like that. So basically, any capital letter you use is considered the beginning of a segment that's going to be used for searching. So it might make your searches a little bit more simple to manage. Now we're going to use fuzzy, which basically between every letter you type in is going to basically use the dot star pattern for regular expressions, so that you're just going to find any string that has those letters at any point in the same order. So if I were to run Emacs now, I can type in FFAP and it will find find file at point, the original, but it will also find diff backup because it has FFAP inside of the word. So it can be a little bit noisy, but if you want to be kind of lazy with the way that you type your commands out, it can be useful, I guess. But I think some of the other options are a little bit more well suited to this, especially for using it with Emacs or maybe, finding file paths, etc. Sometimes when you use, like, let's say council, projectile, find file, it can be useful to be able to say like CTS. So fuzzy gives you that capability where you can basically just type in whatever letters you know are in the path and it will find that for you. All right, so that's great. That's how you basically configure Prescient's filter methods, but maybe you don't really like the way that filtering works in Prescient. You just want to have the sorting behavior that Prescient gives you. You can easily turn off ivpresscient's filtering. So if I were to run this ivpresscient enable filtering, you can turn that off. However, you will need to restart ivpresscient mode if you're doing this interactively in your config. So I'll have to type ivpresscient mode one more time to disable it, and then ivpresscient mode one more time to re-enable it. And now if I were to open Emacs, the normal usual IV filtering styles are being used. So whatever you've configured for your IV filtering styles will now be back in place as you expect them to be. And one last thing that you will want to know about here is that you may notice that the highlighting of results. What am I doing wrong here? Okay, the highlighting of results are a little bit different than what you may be used to with IV. And apparently there's a way to set this back to the old highlighting style, which is to use this ivpresscient retain classic highlighting variable, which you can set to T. I think it's set to nil by default. Yeah, set to nil by default. So if you run this, I believe it changes the way that the highlighting is done to replicate what the highlighting, the actual coloring of the highlights are, to make it more like Ivy. So if you've gotten used to this and it looks good to you, maybe you want to use this variable to change Prescient's highlighting faces basically back to the Ivy faces. I don't think it works 100% the same way, but it does look more like what you're expecting. So that can be useful if you are used to the old aesthetics. All right, so this can also be used with company mode. So there is a package called company prescient, which provides sorting capabilities into company completions. It does not provide filtering the same way that we've seen so far with Ivy, because it would require having a different backend to the company completions engine, which we don't want to do because we want to use some other completion engine that we are using for our projects, like maybe the LSP mode completion engine or whatever you want to use. So we only expect to see sorting to work here. So let's go into a project. Let's see, hack panel project, source, server, index.ts. Now, I'm going to just drop in here. I think LSP mode will turn on. And if I type in something to complete, like OAuth client, and I select that. Now, if I type in O, well, OAuth client shows up first mainly because it's the first completion with starting with O apparently. But let's see, if I type in OF and select that, then maybe OF again. Well, let's type O. Okay, so now we see that it's not actually sorting. If I type O one more time, it's not sorting the off-screen buffering first because it's not using any kind of history knowledge. So if I go back to this config and run it, we're going to download and install company prescient. We're going to make sure that this gets loaded after company because it depends on company mode. And then we are going to run company prescient mode 1 to turn on company prescient mode. Now if I go back here, type O, you can see that sorting is already in place because we're sorting by the length of the candidates. If I type in that off-screen buffering and press enter, now if I type O again, off-screen buffering will be the first candidate suggested. And this can be useful if you use certain functions in your code a lot or certain types a lot. It can make it easier for you to get to those whenever you're doing your sorting or when you're doing your completions. Also, the same thing applies when it comes to the sorting of results based on the length. You can also turn that off if you want to get the original sort of the results. I believe there's another variable for company, let's see, company prescient sort length enable. So this may be a special value for companies so that you can turn that off for company mode in case you don't want it to work for company mode, but you do want it to work for Ivy. So you can do that sort of conditionally based on which integration you're currently using. So if you want to not sort based on length, you can turn this variable off, whereas your normal prescient sorting variable will be on by default. All right, so lastly, let's talk about remembering this history between sessions. Now, let's see, I'll have to kill this session real quick to test this out. So right now with MetaX, we're getting Ivy prescient mode to being suggested first. But if I close this this Emacs session and restart it, give it a second to wake up, then what you'll see is that the suggestion is not there anymore. And in fact, it's not there. All of it seems to be turned off. Let me just double check the config for a second. So Ivy prescient mode. Now that's interesting. Oh, it's because I didn't put it in the config. I was using it directly out of an org file. Well, that's a mistake on my part, but let's fix that. So still the files that would be created would be there. So streams Emacs prescient. So let's just drop this into the config because we're gonna check this into our config anyway. So let's load up our emacs.org file. Let's go to our Ivy configuration, and I'll just drop this right here at the bottom for now. All right, so we're gonna load Ivy prescient, and I'll exit this. Well, actually, let's do this one more time. All right, we see that we're getting the right sorting that we expect to see, and I will run eShell. All right, so now eShell is the first item suggested. I'm gonna close this session. I'm gonna start it up one more time. And then whenever I do that and run Emacs, you're gonna see that it's not remembered across sessions. So when I do MetaX, eShell is not there anymore. Now, if you want these things to be remembered across your Emacs sessions, what you need to do is to, let's see, Ivy prescient. You need to set run the, I think it's prescient, let's see, prescient history, preserve. Yeah, I need to go back to my org notes real quick. Okay, so it's, let's just jump down to the bottom here. Okay, so prescient persist mode is what it's called. So now I'm gonna go back into the config and I'm gonna drop this in. You notice that our configuration is not highlighting correctly because org mode does that sometimes. So I'm gonna run prescient persist mode here, and I'm gonna run eShell one more time, and now we see eShell is at the top of the list. Now I'm gonna exit Emacs, and I'm gonna run it one more time, and now we'll see that this history should be preserved across sessions because we've turned on that persist mode. So now I run MX and eShell is there. So this is what you need to do, which you probably will want to do whenever you set up prescient. You're gonna want to make sure that gets loaded again so that you can make use of this benefit every time you load up Emacs and not just this current session. But, you know, it's up to you. Really, it's just a matter of your own personal taste. All right, so one last thing to mention, which is a little bit sad to say, I guess, because I was interested in making a video about this package. Apparently, the ivpressure completion integration for Prescient needs a new maintainer. So if you look at the GitHub repo, there is an issue where the current maintainer or the creator of Prescient is looking for someone to help out with the IV integration. Oh, okay. I think I once again broke EXWM. So basically, they're looking for someone to help because they haven't actually used Prescient in a while because they actually wrote Selectrum. So they've written their own completion framework and they don't use Ivy anymore. So if you like using Ivy and you want to use it with Prescient and you want to make sure that it continues to work over time as Ivy continues to be developed and changed, definitely consider giving some help to the prescient.el project to help maintain Ivy Prescient because, you know, this is going to be a widely used thing. You know, people are going to want to use Ivy Prescient and it's good for someone to be there to help maintain that. So if you've got any interest in contributing to an Emacs package or to write some eLisp, this would be a great opportunity, I think. All right, so let me jump back over to the, let's see, EXWM, workspace, switch to buffer. I love whenever I have to do this on stream. It just fills me with joy. Okay, so I think we're good enough here. All right, so lastly, I want to mention one more time that we are going to talk about Selectrum. I'm interested in trying because I haven't actually used it yet. The interesting thing about Selectrum is that it does sort of decompose a lot of all these things that Ivy does into separate packages that are maintained by different people, and they sort of all work well together. So I think it's an interesting idea in case you like to reduce the heaviness of the things that you use and you want to use something that's more minimal and, you know, gives you full control on customizability. So I think Selectrum is an interesting approach for that, and we will definitely talk about it in a video that we'll do soon, I think. All right, that's all for this discussion today. So the last thing I want to do is to thank my sponsors. These people have decided to sponsor the work that I'm doing here, making these videos, and I'm very appreciative for all the help and support that they're providing. Today, there is a new way to sponsor the channel, which is on Patreon. So we still have the github.com/sponsor/DavyWill, which personally is my preferred place to do sponsoring. However, you can also, if you don't want to do GitHub sponsors, you can go to patreon.com/systemcrafters to sponsor the channel there. So any support that you're willing to provide would be great. But, you know, as always, these videos are free to watch, so you don't have to feel pressure to support or anything. It's just up to you. All right, so I believe that concludes our video today. So I'm not exactly sure what we're going to cover next week, but I've got some thoughts, so we'll see what happens then. So if you have any other ideas for things you want to see us cover in the channel, definitely leave them in the comments. And also, please make sure to hit subscribe and hit the bell so that you get notified anytime new videos or streams are posted, because YouTube likes to not give you those notifications whenever you don't click the bell. So make sure to do that so that you get to know whenever we do new videos. Well, until next time, I hope you have a happy holidays if I don't see you on Friday. And until then, happy hacking. We'll see you. Thanks.